A few years ago, a Reddit user shared something surprisingly honest. He wrote that he earns a good salary, lives in a comfortable apartment, and doesn't consider himself a big spender. He doesn't buy luxury watches. He doesn't gamble. He doesn't go on extravagant vacations. He doesn't even own a particularly new car. And yet every single month, just a few days before payday, he finds himself opening his banking app with a familiar, low-grade feeling of anxiety. That quiet dread of checking a number you're not sure you want to see. He couldn't figure it out. Because when he actually thought about his spending, none of it seemed irresponsible. A coffee on the way to work. Food delivery on nights when cooking felt impossible. A few streaming subscriptions running in the background. Some small purchases here and there. Things that made life a little more comfortable, a little more convenient. Nothing dramatic. Nothing he'd be embarrassed to explain to anyone. So he posted about it. And what happened next was the part that stayed with people. Thousands of responses came in. And almost every single one described the exact same experience. Different cities. Different incomes. Different jobs. Same feeling at the end of the month. The same confused arithmetic. The same sense that money was leaving without a clear destination. That thread became something of a mirror for people. Because it turns out most of us don't lose money through catastrophic decisions. We lose it through small, quiet routines that feel completely normal, because for most people, they are normal. They're just expensive in ways we never stop to calculate. That's what this is about. There's a concept in behavioral economics that helps explain why this happens so consistently. It's the idea that our brains are genuinely bad at registering small, recurring costs, not because we're careless, but because of how human attention actually works. Our minds are built to notice change, contrast, and magnitude. A $1,000 purchase gets our attention. A $12 monthly charge, quietly auto-renewing in the background, barely registers as a decision at all. Morgan Housel wrote about something related in the psychology of money, this idea that financial outcomes are rarely the result of dramatic moments. They're the result of quiet, compounding patterns that build slowly over time, in both directions. The same logic that makes patient investing powerful also makes unchecked spending quietly devastating. Richard Thaler, the behavioral economist who won the Nobel Prize partly for his work on mental accounting, spent years studying how people categorize and process money differently depending on context. We treat a restaurant meal differently than groceries, even if the spending is identical. We treat a subscription differently than a single purchase of the same value because the subscription doesn't feel like a decision we're actively making. It just happens. And that's the central problem. Most of the habits that drain money don't feel like financial decisions in the moment. They feel like living. They feel like convenience or comfort or keeping up with a reasonable lifestyle. They feel like what everyone around you is doing, because most of the time, everyone around you actually is doing the same thing. So here are 15 of the most common ones. You'll probably recognize most of them. That's the point. The first one almost everyone has, even if they don't know the full extent of it. Subscriptions. Think about the last time you actually sat down and listed every recurring charge coming out of your account each month. Not just the obvious ones, the main streaming service, the music app, all of them. The second streaming service you added for one specific show and never removed. The cloud storage upgrade you accepted because your phone was full. The news publication you subscribed to during a free trial and forgot to cancel. The meditation app. The premium version of something you use occasionally. The fitness platform. The password manager. The software tool you needed once for a project. A 2022 survey by C+R Research found something that surprised a lot of people when it made the rounds online. The average American estimated they spent around $86 a month on subscriptions. The actual figure, when researchers tallied it up, was closer to $219. That's not a small miscalculation. That's a gap of over $100 a month, money people were spending without any conscious awareness that they were spending it. Thaler would recognize this immediately. Once something becomes automatic, it exits the mental accounting system entirely. It's not a choice anymore. It's just a condition of life. And conditions of life don't get audited. The second habit is one that crept into daily life so gradually that most people can't remember life before it. Food delivery. Picture a Tuesday evening. Work ran long. There's something in the fridge, technically, but cooking requires a version of yourself that doesn't currently exist. So the app opens. The scroll begins. Something is chosen, usually something slightly more indulgent than you'd make at home, because that's the psychological logic of ordering out. You're already treating yourself. Might as well. And then the additions start. An extra side, because it's only $3 more. A drink. Maybe a dessert. And then at checkout, the real numbers appear. The subtotal. The delivery fee. The service fee, which is different from the delivery fee, though it's never entirely clear why. The tip, which you add because you know someone is driving across town in their own car. By the time it arrives, a meal that might have cost $12 in a restaurant has become $34 on your doorstep. Dan Ariely wrote in Predictably Irrational about how humans consistently pay what he calls convenience premiums, extra costs attached to ease and immediacy, without consciously registering them as choices. The mental calculation goes, it's worth it for the time saved. And sometimes that's genuinely true. But research on food delivery behavior from McKinsey found that consumers reliably spend more per meal when ordering through an app than they would in person or cooking at home. The convenience is real. So is the cost. We just tend to only feel one of them. The third habit is one that feels like its opposite, responsible, even virtuous. The weekly grocery run. There's something genuinely satisfying about a full refrigerator. Walking out of a grocery store with bags of fresh produce, proteins, ingredients for 3 or 4 different meals, it feels like adulthood done correctly. Like you have a plan. The problem is the version of yourself doing the shopping is not the version of yourself who will actually be home on a Wednesday night, tired, with 40 minutes before a work call. That version of yourself orders delivery. Or eats cereal. Or finds some leftover from 2 nights ago. The USDA has estimated that American households waste somewhere between 30 and 40% of the food supply at the consumer level. When you translate that into dollars, it becomes a significant recurring drain that most people never notice because it doesn't look like spending. It looks like a compost bin. It looks like a yogurt that expired. It looks like a bag of spinach that turned before you could use it. This is what psychologists call optimism bias. We plan for an idealized version of our week. The week where we meal prep, cook most nights, eat the vegetables before they go soft. That version of the week exists in our heads in vivid detail. In actual life, it shows up maybe twice a month. The fourth habit is newer than the others and more deliberately engineered. Your phone buzzes. A notification from a retail app. A flash sale, 40% off, ends tonight. You weren't thinking about shopping. You weren't in a spending mindset. But the notification arrived at exactly the right psychological moment. A small break, a moment of low resistance, and now you're looking. Nir Eyal wrote extensively in Hooked about how modern apps are designed to build habitual usage through what he calls variable reward mechanics. The same psychological architecture that makes social media compulsive works in retail. The surprise of a sale. The urgency of a countdown. The scarcity of only 4 left. These are not accidental features. They're the product. Research from Salesforce has found that personalized push notifications significantly increase unplanned purchasing behavior. The word personalized matters here because the algorithm already knows what you've looked at, what you almost bought, what you bought before. The notification isn't random. It's targeted. And it works remarkably well on the version of you that's just sitting on the couch, mildly bored, phone already in hand. The fifth habit is the one that makes people feel, at first, like things are getting better. The raise arrives. Or the promotion. Or the better job. And there's a brief, genuine moment of relief, the sense that now things will be different. Now there's room. And so, logically, life adjusts upward. A nicer apartment, not extravagant, just more comfortable. A gym that's actually pleasant to go to. Restaurants that feel more fitting for where you are in your career. Small upgrades across the board, each of them justifiable on its own. 6 months later, the savings rate is almost identical to what it was before. This is lifestyle inflation. And it's not irrational, exactly, it's completely human. Morgan Housel captures something important about this in The Psychology of Money. The ability to want less is one of the rarest and most valuable things a person can develop. Not because deprivation is virtuous, but because the goalpost moves so naturally and so quietly that most people never notice it shifting. Psychologists call the underlying mechanism hedonic adaptation. We return to a baseline level of satisfaction remarkably quickly after any positive change: a new apartment, a new car, a new salary. What felt like more than enough becomes, within months, just the new normal. And normal always wants a little more. The sixth habit has its own cultural shorthand at this point, but it's worth understanding why it persists even when people are fully aware of it. The gym membership. January is when it starts, usually. There's a version of this that billions of people have lived. The sign-up feels like a commitment, and it is, in a meaningful way, to a better self, to a healthier routine, to finally using something you're paying for. By March, the visits have become less frequent. By June, it's been 3 weeks. By August, the membership has essentially become a small monthly tax that nobody officially decided to keep paying. And yet canceling is genuinely difficult. Not logistically, it's usually a phone call or a few clicks. Psychologically, because canceling means closing the door on the version of yourself that was going to go. It means acknowledging that the plan didn't work. Della Vigna and Malmendier, in a landmark study published in the American Economic Review, tracked health club members and found that people who paid flat monthly fees used the gym dramatically less than they had predicted when they signed up, and continued paying for months, sometimes years, past the point of regular usage. This is the sunk cost fallacy meeting something even more personal: identity protection. Keeping the membership open means the story isn't over yet. Canceling it means it is. The seventh habit is one most people rationalize before they've finished thinking about it. The phone upgrade. The announcement drops. Reviews appear. The camera is marginally better. The screen is slightly more refined. The current phone works. It works fine, actually, but the new one is meaningfully improved in ways that feel significant when you're reading about them in comparison mode. So the upgrade happens. And for a few weeks, the new phone genuinely feels different. Sharper. Faster. Better. There's a real pleasure to it. And then, within 3 months, it's just the phone. Sonia Lyubomirsky's research on hedonic adaptation documents this pattern with remarkable consistency across categories of spending. We adapt to positive changes faster than we expect. The excitement fades. The new thing becomes the baseline. And the baseline, after a while, starts to feel like it could use an update. This is not a technology problem specifically. It's a human problem that technology has learned to monetize very effectively. The eighth habit is one that rarely shows up in personal finance conversations, even though almost everyone experiences it. The group dinner. The weekend plan. The friend's birthday at a restaurant that's slightly out of your budget range, suggested by someone who doesn't know or hasn't thought about your budget range. And nobody says anything, because nobody wants to be the one who makes it complicated. So you go. And once you're there, the social logic takes over. Drinks are ordered. The table splits an appetizer. Someone suggests a bottle of wine. And when the bill arrives, the splitting evenly dynamic kicks in, the one where it becomes socially awkward to ask to itemize. So everyone just divides the total and adds a tip, and the number lands somewhere notably above what you'd planned to spend. Thorstein Veblen identified the fundamental psychology of this more than a century ago, the idea that much of what humans spend is downstream of social positioning and comparison rather than individual desire. More recent research published in the Journal of Consumer Psychology has found correlations between social media use and spending in what researchers call visible categories: dining, travel, clothing, the things other people can see. We spend partly to participate, to belong, to match a standard of living that exists as much in perception as in reality. The ninth habit is the one that feels most earned and is therefore the hardest to question. The week was hard. Genuinely hard. Long hours, difficult conversations, the kind of exhaustion that isn't really physical, it's something deeper. The commute home is quiet. And somewhere in that quiet, a thought forms. Something like, I've earned something. I deserve a small reward. The purchase that follows isn't random. It's a response to a specific emotional state, and Roy Baumeister's research on ego depletion helps explain why. Decision fatigue is real. By the end of a demanding day, The mental resources we use for self-regulation are measurably depleted. Willpower isn't a fixed trait, it's more like a battery, and it drains. By evening, financial self-control is genuinely harder than it was in the morning. Psychologists also describe something called moral licensing, the phenomenon where doing something difficult or virtuous creates a felt sense of entitlement to a subsequent indulgence. A hard week at work, a workout completed, a difficult conversation handled well. These things create a kind of internal credit that the mind wants to spend. The spending isn't irrational. It's emotionally patterned, which makes it very consistent. The 10th one is small enough that it almost feels embarrassing to mention. ATM fees. The nearest machine isn't the bank's, but it's right there and the transaction is small cash for something quick. The fee appears on screen, $3.50. It's accepted without much thought. A 2023 survey by Bankrate found that the average out-of-network ATM fee had reached around $4.73 per transaction when you include both the ATM operator's charge and the bank's own fee. For someone doing this casually once or twice a week, not out of carelessness, just convenience, the annual total approaches $250. For something that requires absolutely no spending decision whatsoever. Just a slightly inconvenient walk to a different machine. That's the nature of microcosts. Each one is too small to justify thinking about. Collectively, they're not. The 11th habit is built directly into the systems we use every day. Auto-renewals. The annual software subscription renews. The streaming plan bumps up in price. The email came months ago, technically, but emails about subscription price increases are the category of email most likely to be skimmed and forgotten. The insurance premium adjusts. The domain registration charges again. None of this required a decision. It simply happened. Thaler and Sunstein's work in Nudge introduced the concept of choice architecture, the idea that the way choices are presented shapes behavior as powerfully as the choices themselves. Default settings, specifically, are extraordinarily influential. Opt-out systems maintain far higher participation rates than opt-in systems, not because people have decided to stay, but because inertia is a stronger force than most of us acknowledge. Auto-renewal is opt-out by design, and the price it auto-renews at is not always the price you originally signed up for. The 12th habit is one almost nobody audits because it doesn't feel like a category. Transportation costs, the small ones. Not the car payment. Not the annual insurance premium. The daily parking. The toll. The Uber home because the timing didn't work out. The parking ticket from an expired meter. The gas spent on a longer route. The train ticket bought at full price because the off-peak window passed. Donald Shoup, the urban planning researcher whose work examined how people think about parking and transportation costs, documented that drivers consistently and significantly underestimate what they actually spend moving themselves around. Not because they're in denial, but because the costs arrive in fragments, across dozens of small transactions, none of which feel significant individually. Add them up over a year and most people are surprised. Not shocked, just quietly surprised. The 13th habit is a product of the last 15 years and didn't exist before that in quite this form. Opening an app with no intention to buy anything. It might be Amazon. It might be a clothing site. It might be any of the dozens of retail apps that have learned to surface exactly the right thing at exactly the right moment based on exactly the right data about your behavior. You're not shopping. You're just looking. Just browsing. Killing a few minutes. The app knows this and is designed for it. Nir Eyal describes in Hooked how variable reward mechanisms, the same core psychological loop behind social media, are embedded in e-commerce platforms. The surprise of a recommendation. The satisfaction of finding something you didn't know you wanted. The minimal friction of one-click checkout, which removes the deliberation that might otherwise give you pause. Just looking has become increasingly expensive in the era of personalized retail. The 14th habit is one that feels like financial management, even when it's quietly making things worse. The credit card minimum payment. The statement arrives and the number is significant, more than you'd like, though not catastrophic. But there's a smaller number right next to it. The minimum payment. It's manageable. Paying it feels like handling the situation. Like being responsible. What happens in the background is something credit card statements are now legally required to disclose: how long it will take to pay off the balance at minimum payments, and how much interest will accumulate over that period. The figures are there in small print on every statement. Research consistently finds that very few people read that section. The number that gets paid attention to is the minimum, because it's the one that solves the immediate problem of this month. The future problem grows quietly. And the 15th habit is the one that ties everything else together. Next month. Next month, the subscriptions will get audited and trimmed. Next month, the meal prep will actually happen and the food delivery will slow down. Next month, the budget will be tighter and more intentional. Next month, after this stressful period at work settles down, after this one expense clears, after things calm down a little, next month will be the reset. This is present bias in its purest form. Behavioral economists have documented it extensively, the consistent human tendency to discount future consequences in favor of present ease, and to imagine the future self as meaningfully more disciplined than the present one. The future self will have more willpower, more time, more resolve. The future self is not tired on a Tuesday night. The future self did not just have a hard week. But the future self, when it arrives, is just you again. In the same apartment, with the same habits, with the same apps on the same phone, and the same subscriptions running quietly in the background. Next month becomes this month. And this month feels a lot like last month. That Reddit user eventually figured out where his money was going. Not through any dramatic overhaul. Not through an extreme budget or a strict new system. He just looked carefully at the actual record of what had been happening. The subscriptions he'd accumulated over 4 years. The delivery spending that had become a near-daily habit. The recurring charges that had been auto-renewing unnoticed. The social spending he'd been doing on autopilot. He said the strangest part wasn't the total. The total was significant, but it wasn't the point. The strangest part was how reasonable every single item felt when he looked at it individually. How each one had made sense in the moment it was decided. How none of them felt like a mistake. That's the thing about this kind of spending. It doesn't happen because people are reckless or uninformed or bad at math. It happens because small, recurring, comfortable habits don't feel like financial decisions. They feel like life. And life, when you're not watching it closely, tends to get quietly expensive in ways that take a long time to notice. The money doesn't disappear through stupidity. It disappears through patterns that were never examined. That's usually all it takes, just looking at them clearly. Not with guilt. Not with some dramatic resolution about what comes next. Just seeing them for what they actually are.